So for this video, we are going to finish the top side of our first bridge. Then we're going to complete the other side of our bridge from top to bottom. In addition, we will be adding the diagonal segments to our bridge. We're going to bind our two sides together, and we're going to finally test our bridge and see how this bridge performs. Keep on watching. In this section, I'm just finishing up the legs for my first side of the bridge, and I am using a trigger clamp. So at this point, I'm going to cut out the top piece up here that will be 24.5 centimeters long, and I'll cut it exactly to that length so that I'll then cut out my vertical pieces. I will be factoring in the thickness of the balsa wood piece that's horizontal, so I will adjust my height of my vertical pieces to make sure that this area up here is 10 centimeters tall and that this area down here is also 10 centimeters tall. To ensure that the top portion of my bridge is 10 centimeters tall, I used a piece of balsa wood attached to my beam to ensure that I had a 10 centimeter length for the beam. That's going between the top segment and the bottom segment of the bridge. So at this point, I'm dividing 24.5 by 2 so that I can find my midpoint, and that way I can add a beam for support right at the center of my top beam. This portion is a bit frustrating. You have to make sure that every beam, every vertical beam, is perpendicular to every horizontal beam. So make sure you have 90-degree angles and that your beams do not slant. So now that we have our first side cut out, glued, and placed together, it's time to work on side number 2. So side number 2 is going to be a bit easier since we don't have to get our measurements from scratch. In this situation, we're just going to place our uncut pieces on top of side number 1, and we're going to just mark our line we need to cut. So our bottom section is now done. Now we move on to the top. The sides are now set up with the vertical and the horizontal pieces. Now we're going to go ahead and cut and paste the diagonals. Just to be clear, I waited a whole 24 hours for my bridge to dry to make sure that I did not displace any vertical or horizontal pieces. To quickly mark and cut the diagonals, I placed my bridge on top of the diagonals, but I couldn't measure them correctly, so I had to actually clean up my edges, and I used a small little knife to actually clean up the pieces of glue that were dried off. So after marking the lid, I cut it, sanded it, and then glued it, and I repeated the same process for every other diagonal for this bridge. So now that our two sides are done, we can now bind them together. Keep in mind that for my drawing, I want my width to be 9.5 centimeters. To do this, I need to consider the width of my two sides at 0.7 centimeters. So if I have two sides, it's 1.4 centimeters in total. So I need to cut out beams that are 8.1 centimeters long to bind the other two sides together. This is pretty much what's going on in this video. I'm cutting out the beams that will be used to bind the two sides together, and they are at 8.1 centimeters in length. Now that I have some beams cut out, I'm just checking to see if they're the same size, so I sand them down and they're ready to go. Now I'm checking to see that there will be a snug fit for my two sides, so I'm using binder clips to make sure that they are flush. In this situation, I'll be marking where I want my beams placed using a marker. The binder clips worked well to keep the two sides together as they dried. However, I do recommend that you use trigger clamps instead of the binder clips. So now that our bridge is done, after several nights of working on it, we can finally test it to see how strong it is. Unfortunately, my bridge was not that strong. It only held up 76 pounds of force. Other bridges that students make can hold up to 200 to 300 pounds. So remember, to get a better score on this test, you need to create a bridge that is light, but that can also hold the most amount of weight. And shout out to Carlos and Vanessa at Mesa UCR for letting us borrow this device to test our bridge. Thanks for watching. Try making your own bridge, and hopefully it was as strong as mine. See ya.